So Japan's economy is at a major crossroads, and right now a really powerful group of lawmakers is pushing a massive and pretty controversial plan to jolt it back to life. Today, we're going to break down their $25 trillion gamble and what it could mean for the future of one of the world's biggest economies.
25 trillion yen. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is the staggering size of the economic stimulus package we are talking about. I mean, it's a number so big it's kind of hard to wrap your head around, right? So what is all this for, and who exactly is pushing for it?
All right, here's how we're going to break this all down for you. We'll start with the proposal itself, then dive into the 30-year-old problem it's trying to fix. We'll look at their aggressive solution, the new economic rules they want to write, tackle that giant question of debt, and finally, zoom out to see the bigger picture for Japan.
So who's actually behind this monumental proposal? And get this isn't some fringe idea cooked up on the sidelines. The push is coming from a really influential group of lawmakers, right from the heart of Japan's ruling party.
They've got a bit of a mouthful for a name, the Parliamentary Group for Promoting Aggressive and Responsible Fiscal Policy. And, this group of 70 policymakers, they have a really fascinating origin story. They're basically the direct intellectual legacy of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. He was the one who encouraged them to study macroeconomics, and they've since grown into this powerful internal force, even helping to launch figures like Sanai Takaichi into the national spotlight.
So the big question is, why? Why do they feel a plan this aggressive is so necessary? Well, to understand that, we've got to look at a problem that has been haunting Japan's economy for decades.
Think about that. For nearly 30 years, an entire generation, people's paychecks, when you account for inflation, have gone absolutely nowhere. This isn't just some dry economic statistic. It's the story of stagnation that has deeply, deeply affected the lives of millions.
And all that long-term stagnation has created what economists call a deflationary mindset. You can almost think of it like a psychological trap that's taken root across the entire society ever since the country's huge asset bubble burst way back in the early 90s. And breaking out of that mindset, that's the real challenge here.
So here's how that trap works. Picture this. On one side, you've got corporations just sitting on piles of cash instead of investing it or raising wages. And on the other side, you have families and households saving their money instead of spending it because they're worried about the future. It's this vicious cycle that just grinds the whole economy to a halt.
And the consequences of this? Well, they're pretty stark. Japan's potential for economic growth has been on a steady decline. And the middle class, the traditional engine of any modern economy, is actually shrinking. This is the crisis this proposal is trying to solve.
Which brings us to the solution. The group is calling for an aggressive approach, and that word aggressive is key here. It's a clear signal that they are done with the cautious, timid policies of the past. They want to mobilize every single tool they've got.
So where's all this money going to go? Well, the 25 trillion yen is split into three main areas or pillars. First up is livelihood security. That's direct support for people to help them deal with rising prices. The second is all about crisis and growth. So investing in things like pandemic preparedness, but also in key sectors to fuel future growth. And finally, the third pillar is a major boost to Japan's diplomacy and defense, which, reflects the kind of crazy geopolitical world we're living in.
Now, this isn't just about spending money for the sake of spending it. Oh no. They have very specific targets in mind. They want to close what's called the output gap, which is basically the difference between what the economy could be producing and what it is producing. They're also aiming for 3% nominal GDP growth, and this is the big one, a sustained inflation rate of 2% to finally, hopefully, break that deflationary cycle for good.
But here's the thing. To actually make this work, they're arguing that Japan needs way more than just a one-time cash injection. It needs to fundamentally change its entire economic rulebook. And this is where things get really interesting, and honestly, pretty controversial.
This is a massive shift in thinking. Okay, so for years, Japan's whole playbook was about one thing, fiscal austerity, trying to balance the books, making sure spending didn't outpace tax revenues. This new proposal, it pretty much throws that old rulebook out the window. The new goal is to focus on growing the entire economy, the GDP, so that the national debt looks smaller and way more manageable in comparison. It's a total pivot from austerity to a focus on growth.
Now, you might think this sounds totally radical, right? But for the people pushing this plan, it's not at all. They argue that they are simply trying to bring Japan's fiscal policy back in line with what most other major economies already do, which is use growth as the main tool for managing national debt.
Okay,
But let's address the elephant in the room, shall we? Whenever you talk about this kind of massive government spending in Japan, there's one question that just screams out. What about the country's enormous national debt?
And this is probably the biggest, most powerful argument against the whole thing. The idea that all this spending is really just a debt that today's kids and grandkids will be forced to pay back. It's a really powerful emotional and economic argument.
So how do the proposal's authors respond? Well, they don't just brush it off. They hit it head on. They call these fears unfounded, saying they aren't backed up by the data or by how other countries around the world operate. And they've got a killer statistic to back this up. While it's true the government is deeply in debt, Japanese households are sitting on an unbelievable pile of savings, over 2,100 trillion yen in financial assets. The argument is that if you look at the country as a whole, the resources to back this kind of investment are already there. They're just sitting on the sidelines.
And this right here, this quote, really gets to the absolute heart of their argument. They're trying to completely reframe the entire debate. For them, the biggest risk isn't taking on new debt. The biggest risk, the biggest cost, is doing nothing and continuing to lose entire decades of potential growth.
So, when you step back and look at the bigger picture, it becomes clear that this proposal is about so much more than just numbers in a budget. It's really about a fundamentally new vision for Japan's future.
When you really boil it down, they're not just talking about an economic plan. They're framing this as a national challenge, a mission to reverse 30 years of decline, to rebuild the economy for ordinary people, and to restore the nation's core strength on the world stage.
So in the end, it all boils down to one massive question. After 3 decades of going nowhere fast, is this 25 trillion yen bet the bold, necessary gamble that Japan has to take to finally break the cycle and reclaim its economic future? Only time will tell.